Good morning, Beatrice.
Good morning,
It's,
Martha.
it's lunchtime here in London, and I'm missing my lunch, but it's breakfast time in New York, and I think you're actually eating your breakfast now live on Virtual Design Festival.
Yes, I'm very proud of my homemade sourdough bread, Marcus. So I'm, this is where I'm at.
I think we should talk about that first then. So you wanted to make that yesterday from scratch, right?
I made it from scratch, and I'm sort of like one of those sourdough bores, talking about their starter and and I made it last week actually. It's been frozen, so it's lasting. It's lasting well. We're in quarantine here.
And what have you got on your sourdough?
I've got butter, and I've got honey. The last of the honey, actually. We're kind of running out of food.
Okay, but anyway, seriously, let's get down to business because you are the founder of The World Around, which is like an architectural platform. Actually, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and The World Around, and then also why you're appearing on Virtual Design Festival today, because you've curated an entire day's worth of celebration of Earth Day.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm Beatrice Galilee and I am an architecture and design curator. And last year I co-founded a platform called The World Around, which is, well, it started out being a in-person conference. So we had our first event in January, an all-day symposium held in New York with Junior Shigami and Liz Diller and Paola Antonelli, which we live streamed with you. And the plan slightly changed with the coronavirus, and we'd originally planned to do another conference, an in-person conference around this time in spring. And I believe I sort of wrote you a little note a few weeks ago to see if maybe there was a way that we could collaborate in doing it online together. Turned out that you're already planning to do something online, the Virtual Design Festival. So I thought it would be interesting to do something for Earth Day, because a lot of the ideas that sort of really landed in January, and I felt that was really at the heart of what architects and designers and artists are concerned about, are related to the climate crisis. And it seems really hard to disassociate any sort of practice right now from what's going on with the planet. And more that seems to be what I care about and what I want to talk about, and the people I follow and the people I admire are talking about. And so it seemed quite a good fit to try and put everybody together, ask them how they're feeling, ask them, what's this crisis and the COVID crisis got to do with climate change. We sort of put it all together for Earth Day, basically.
But it's true, you were the first collaborator that we brought on board for Virtual Design Festival. You didn't know at the time that we were planning it. We didn't know what it was going to be. We just had this idea, but here it is, and our viewers can enjoy all the content a bit later on. But before you talk us through what's happening in the Earth Day takeover of Virtual Design Festival, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, I've known you for 15 years from back in London when you were working as a writer on Icon magazine, and then I just started Dezeen, and you ran a little underground talks venue with a very interesting name. Tell us about that period and what you've done since then.
Yeah, so you were my first boss, Marcus. I kind of pitched you an article at the Venice Biennale, and I think Kieran and Justin were there as well, and I sort of became part of the Icon team around 2006, I think. And then I think around 2009, I decided that I think that there was a kind of economic crisis around that sort of time, 2008, if anyone remember.
Another one.
So I sort of decided to change from being a architecture writer. I trained as an architect and I was writing about architecture for Icon. And then I was invited to make a proposal to be a curator and curate a show in Shenzhen in China, which I had sort of heard of as a place. Shenzhen, it's this sort of huge booming city, had gone from a 30,000 people fishing village to a 50 million person metropolis in 30 years. And was pretty intrigued, and I sort of put together a proposal and got the job and moved to Beijing in 2009. And that was my first big curatorial project, was the Shenzhen Hong Kong Biennale. And then when I came back to London in 2010, some friends of mine, Aberrant Architecture, had been working on a restaurant renovation. They had just started their practice, and they'd done a show with me in China. And they found this space, and they said, there's a sort of underground to this restaurant. Should we, do something with it? So we decided to sort of a bit like a tribute, to Storefront for Art and Architecture, which is a kind of amazing gallery in New York. We decided to start our own little architecture and design space underneath a Mexican restaurant in Old Street, amazingly called the Gopher Hole. Which is 10 years
ago. Remember, I loved the branding then.
You were really not, you were just like, what on earth is that name? And yeah, we were actually going to do something for the 10-year anniversary in December. But yeah, that was a really amazing space. And we had every week or every couple of weeks, we would just have extremely short notice an event. Everyone would pile in there. The sweat would be dripping from the ceiling, everything would break. That's how I met Nelly and Liam and so many of the people that are actually participating in this event.
So the Gopher Hole was kind of like the Cavern Club,
yeah,
of architecture and design, London's architecture and design community.
Yeah, I think it went for about 2 years. And then, we had so many events, like food design events, we had conferences, exhibitions, parties, film shoots, all sorts of stuff. And then I went to Lisbon. I did the Lisbon Architecture Triennale in 2013. And that was a huge, citywide event with Mariana Pastana, Liam Young, Jose Esparza, Danny Abnes. And a lot of really great young architects and designers at the time, Frida Escobedo, Andres Hacker. They were all part of that show. And I think everyone's gone on to do really amazing stuff. And then I went to the Met, and then now I'm doing this.
But you missed out something. Do you remember in 2012 we worked together in London on the Hackney Olympic design scenario? Yeah.
What was it called?
Designed in Hackney.
Something? What was that? Didn't we call it Dezeen Day, Hackney Dezeen Day, or something like
Designed in Hackney Day. So we did a conference about architecture and design in Hackney, which at that point was considered like a dangerous borough full of drug addicts and criminals, and then was transformed. Its reputation was transformed by the Olympics, which was partly held in Hackney.
Absolutely, yeah. And that event was probably the first big conference I'd organised, like back to back. We had a Petra Kucha, we had all these panel discussions. It was a really good day, and we had a little exhibition associated with it as well, with all the great designers from Hackney.
And the Hackney Council told me that there were two things that had helped change the reputation of Hackney around that time. One of them was the massive Radio 1 concert that was held in Hackney with Beyonce and all those kind of people. And they said that our Designed in Hackney initiative was the second biggest changer of people's attitudes to the borough.
Congrats.
That was before the Olympics, of course, and the Olympics happened, and then that became the biggest changer of attitudes, but prior to that. So bring us up to date then. So tell us, what is the world around, and what is its objectives, and what is your objective with the content you've curated today with us?
I suppose as a curator, and also as a writer, I'm always interested in sort of new stuff. Although I trained as an architecture historian, I'm really always interested in what's just happening and the right now. Projects that have just finished, books that have just been written, exhibitions that have just opened. So really the whole premise of the world around is the now, near and next in architecture and design, trying to create a platform for people whose work is, just about to take off, or whose ideas are really getting traction, and maybe they're not the most, super celebrity designers jet setting around the world, but I think whose ideas have, real impact, and whose work has real meaning. So those are the sort of people I try and put together, and also really, it is called the world around. In that sense, I try and have a really diverse amount of regions represented. In today's event, we have people from based in Lagos, based in Thailand and Cambodia. So we try and create sort of a different perspective of what's going on in architecture and design outside the absolute mainstream of what tends to get airtime, essentially. And that's not to say that those people are not deserving of mainstream, and I try and put them in the mainstream in that sense as well.
So what have you got lined up for today then? Who's appearing and what are they talking about? What are they doing?
So we're dividing the day into 3 big sessions, partly because I invited too many people. I got really excited. We were supposed to have, I think 6 or 7, and I think we've got 20 people. So
yeah, it's all spiraled a bit out of control given what we started off talking about, Beatrice, which was a manageable, not too much effort program. It's now, I'm glad I assigned this one to Ben, to be honest. I think he was up all night.
I know, sorry about that. It's just my very excitable nature. So yeah, we've got loads of people who I really love and admire talking all day, and mostly in conversation with each other. So the first session is Rethink the World Around, and we have cooking sections with these amazing artists who deal with food design, and they're going to be talking about something which comes up the whole day, which is what's our relationship with food? How can we be more responsible with what we're growing, with what we're eating? Our relationship to our food has been so detached for so many years, and their practice is all about how to address that. They're talking with Maita Bohabad, who's my old intern, who's amazing. They have a really beautiful discussion. Then we've got Nelly Ben-Hayoun, who talking with Spaka and Jima. They are doing the whole thing on Instagram and have a very intense use of Instagram filters. I'm talking with Kunle Adeyemi, who is very famous for his floating school. He's working on a lot of research about living on water, and had some, we're trying to talk about what's going on in Lagos and, the climate change and architects, and how he sort of feels, I think many people feel at this time, a sort of opportunity to take a step back and look at their own personal responsibility and reflect on their own relationship to air miles and to traveling around the world, and the way that a lot of people have been working and living, I think is going to change a little bit because of this pause. And then we've got Professor Harriet Harris, who was part of your Dezeen Day, and is also someone who was my old PhD professor at the RCA, and she's talking with a really incredible philosopher, Timothy Morton, who wrote a very amazing book called Hyper Objects recently, a few years ago. And they're really, their conversation is just, you want to sort of watch it 3 or 4 times over because it's so dense and so rich. And they're thinking about the role of philosophy and academics in this time. How can we create how can people whose job it is to create frameworks for us to think about the way that we live and the way that we could go about our lives in a slightly more responsible way. So that's pretty amazing first session. And then the next one is Reimagine, which is a lot more sort of dreamy. So people taking us to Cambodia, to Thailand, looking at completely different ways of looking at the world, which is another big theme of the day. It's maybe on Earth Day, this is a way of sort of to another sort of step back in a different direction of what if we looked at the world from a completely different perspective? What if we thought about the world from the perspective of a blade of grass, or from the bottom of the ocean, and how would that make us feel differently about our actions and our responsibility to the planet? And Thomas Thwaites, who you probably know, who spent some time trying to be a goat, as you may remember. So he sort of talks us through his Goat Man project and what it's like to sort of radical empathy. And Mariana Festana, who is the curator of this year's Istanbul Design Biennale, and her exhibition is called Empathy Revisited. And so she's talking with Studio Ossidiana, who live with a parrot. So we've got a live parrot also as part of the event, that they talk about designing for non-human animals, and the responsibility of designers to think about things from a non-anthropocentric perspective. So that session is a little bit dreamy, a lot about empathy and living with nature and living with others. And then the final session is Recreate, which is a bit more practical. People who are landscape architects, Walter Hood, who's an amazing landscape architect on the West Coast here, Mats Rombo, who's a really interesting fashion designer who designed the vegan lettuce slipper, which is incredible. And he's talking about his use of sustainable materials in fashion. And Cameron Sinclair, who's already been part of this, who's talking about, you know, humanitarian architecture and the way that architects can apply themselves and apply their skills to sort of responsible design. I have a conversation with Carson Chan and Design Earth. That's a written interview. And then Andres Hacker and Ivan Monera and the Office for Political Innovation have made a whole new film from scratch for this project that looks at all of the new images and all of the new sort of visual language that we've all become accustomed to in the last month because of coronavirus. And that's just the short, you know,
not much
that can happen.
Not very much. Come on, you could have put a bit more effort into this, Beatrice.
No, it's just a casual Wednesday for me, Marcus. It's just a, you know.
And as someone who's for the last few years curated these real world conferences, these events, what's your view on what's going to happen now? Is this going to become the new normal, that we do these things through our screens from our homes, or can you see that everything will go back to how it was, assuming that the virus is kind of eradicated? Do you have a take on what this means?
I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to do this was to sort of try it out, you know, to see what the potential of this format could be for us, you know, for the world around. We, you know, have to find the answer to that. And actually, I think it's what's amazing. First of all, I mean, people are really good, you know, people kind of really, they show up for things on time and they're super well prepared and everyone's at their computer, you know. So it's actually quite good from an organizational perspective to organize things online. Like it does make sense. People can be much more comfortable, you know, you don't have to fly people around the world. You can feel a little bit more, the people are more accessible to you. That's one sort of interesting part of it, where you feel like you can ask anybody and everybody may or may not have time. So I think from that perspective, we'll definitely do a lot more events online. I think it's worked quite well. For going forward, I sort of still believe in person. You know, I feel that we'll really want to see each other. I feel like we'll want to be together and chat, and that sort of spontaneity, although we're getting better at it through these sort of platforms. I do feel that, you know, we'd like to meet up in person. I spoke to, this whole event's actually sponsored by the Facebook Artist in Residence program, and we spoke to Facebook's VP for product design, and she was saying that VR, you know, is going to be just exactly the same as having somebody in your home, like in, you know, a couple of years. So that's a sort of another sort of spectrum, you know, what's going to happen with those sort of way more advanced technologies, where that goes, and what that will mean for events, what that will mean for, you know, talking to each other and listening to each other. Definitely feel like it's an interesting opportunity to like really fast track what you can do as a conference organizer. But we'll see. Yeah, I mean, it might go horribly wrong. I don't know. I'm assuming it's not, but we'll have to see how it goes today, I guess.
It's interesting the point you make about virtual reality, because one thing that's been quite interesting about this lockdown situation is that in a way it's the kind of tried and tested tools that have come to the fore, but the things that have been with us for several years but we didn't like very much. I used to hate doing video conference calls, largely because it was often on Skype, which isn't very good. Mm-hmm. But you know, fairly straightforward technologies like video conferencing and then video have really come into their own, even though they're not particularly new. And then the more future-facing technologies like VR and AR and kind of immersive technologies haven't really. This was their chance, and they haven't really delivered for us, have they, this time around?
Totally. Yeah. Exactly. Where's my? Yeah. I feel that all of those. I never had so many people just calling me on video. I think I did that to you once. I was like, I'm just calling you on a video
because I want because I can.
Yeah. You know, it seemed a little bit. Yeah, all of the etiquette has just completely transformed. It just seems totally fine to call anyone on a video at any point. Which is quite nice, actually. I quite like that. I think I guess for all, my relationship with VR is, very extremely out of, the loop. But, you sort of think about those things of like wearing something on your face, for me, being in New York at the moment, it's just so much, like, it's quite, I don't know, I just don't want to wear anything on my face. I think I would wait for all of that technology to come to a point where it's like, just there. I think I've seen some technology that's sort of like, the ones where you look at your object through the phone. So you can put your furniture in the room and look at it through your phone and decide if you like it there. I think that there is potential for those types of things, of imagination. But I'm quite interested in game design. We had a game designer at the conference, David O'Reilly, in January. And I was thinking about getting a PlayStation and really trying to understand game design as a pretty interesting, maybe intermediary step to VR, and as a place that is so much design and so much architecture taking place, so much world building in game design, and that seems to be the sort of stepping stone to where we might get to in terms of like quite interesting VR spaces.
Yeah, Liam Young spoke at our Dezeen Day conference in October, and he was talking about that, about how so many architects now designing within gaming engines in real time, taking their clients in to have a look around, making design decisions, and then having to go back to their computers to make those changes. But it is becoming like the new, do you remember Second Life? It's like Second Life that actually works. And when you were saying earlier about not wanting to wear something on your face, another phenomenon that's come out of this whole situation is so much of the discussion is about whether we should wear things on our faces, like masks, face shields, those kind of things. Suddenly it's beginning to become socially acceptable to have things covering your face. In the West, I mean, in the East, it's been the situation for a long time. So I guess we're waiting for the first VR headset come mask and face shields all in one to drop.
There's a gap in the market for mask VR combo. Yeah, definitely. I think that probably the reason it's like that in Asia is because they went through SARS, and I feel like we'll just in the West have gone through coronavirus and will feel quite normal wearing masks out and about. I think I don't really see that going backwards.
And the community of people that you know in architecture and design, and I suppose also the people you've lined up for this afternoon's takeover of Virtual Design Festival, how do they think that this changing situation will permanently affect how they do things and what they do? Will it change architecture? Will it change the reality of buildings? Will it change the way that they're designed? Are people starting to think about the long-term implications of this for the profession?
I think it's a bit soon. On the whole, I think a lot of people are going through sort of stages of grief in this, a little bit like a sort of cycle of stages of grief in terms of coping with the coronavirus. Like some people are in complete denial, they're like, oh, well, it's just going to bounce back. Everything's going back to normal. Architects are still running through their, schedules. They're, issuing drawings and everything is going ahead as planned. And then some people are trying to reconcile what they would regard as their previous life, the way that the way of traveling and the way of taking on jobs all around the world and maybe not being very local and not necessarily being very present in those spaces for those projects. So I think that, everybody's going through it on their own sort of journey. And I think we're right now, I still feel like we're in the beginning, at best, beginning to middle of this. So I think it's quite hard to extrapolate what will happen. I think, of course, I do see that adaptation being quite important. Sort of, I think all of our kind of the nature of our relationship with people in public space is extremely strange right now. Just like avoiding people and not having empty public spaces, empty parks. One of the Walter Hood, the landscape architect I spoke to, was like, it's kind of amazing, to see nature just on its own, without all these people everywhere. So I think I would say that although I tried to ask people what they think, on the whole, people are like, let's see.
Let's see. right back at the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned how you studied architecture, but then you went into architecture journalism, and then the trauma of the 2008 financial crisis pushed you away from journalism, along with lots of other good people from journalism. Actually, there was a big move. You mentioned Kieran Long and Justin McGurk, who were part of the original Icon magazine crew. They moved into curating, you moved into curating journalism, lost a lot of really good people. Now this coronavirus crisis is triggering a second crisis for journalism. It's difficult for everyone, but as someone who runs a media platform, it's really, really hard to keep things going. What are your views on the nature of media itself? What is the media's role in keeping the architecture and design community together and informed? And how should it change? How can it survive this trauma, or how does it need to adapt to new circumstances?
I mean, I do think that what you're doing, for example, with the Virtual Design Festival, I think your instinct was to get everybody together and try to join forces. You know, I think that the architecture media is, and the design media is, you know, it's not a big group of people, you know, and I think that I would imagine that pooling resources is probably quite a sensible idea at this point. You know, when everyone has these different strengths, everybody has different capacities. I think putting on events and providing spaces for people is such a huge, generous and important thing to do. People need to talk to each other. I think there's a lot of people feeling quite isolated, a lot of people with good ideas who don't have connections and how to run with those ideas. You have incredible platform, incredible reach, and to be able to provide these type of spaces is, you know, I think invaluable. I don't think, you know, to be able to, for example, for whoever's going to come up in the festival, you know, they would never have been able to connect to the type of audience that they can get with you. So I do think that there's, I mean, what will happen with the media, the mainstream sort of newspapers and things like that, I really don't know. But I feel like with industries like the design industry, it's a very tight industry, a very supportive on the whole, I think, industry, that we can all, you know, pull together and try and help each other as much as possible. And I think that, you know, the world around, to that extent, you know, we'll try and do our bit when we can and try and support you when we can, and vice versa. So yeah, I think that trying to reach out and get in touch with people who maybe you didn't know before, but, you know, you've read their magazine, or you know, love what they wrote here, then maybe we can all try and work together and support each other through this.
Yeah, and thank you very much for your support as well. It's very, really important to us to have this key event in our schedule. But I think you're right. I think for us, we suddenly perceived of what Dezeen was in a different way. We suddenly perceived of it as a space, because in the very early days of thinking about the Virtual Design Festival, we realized that the model of a website was not the right model, or the model of WordPress was not the right model. The model of Milan Design Week was not the right model, or it was something new. And it was the best way we could conceive of it was to think of it as a music festival, where there's all this land, and which you can have something over here, which is maybe like for young designers, and then you can have something here, which is more like a marketplace, and then you can have something over here for the brands. And so it suddenly flipped our perception of what we had. We knew that we had a lot of people that could watch stuff. We knew that we couldn't fill that field with stuff all on our own. So we reached out to whoever was interested in coming on board. And definitely it was really important to us to reach out to other media platforms as well, because we know how hard it is for them. And we've got a few collaborations coming up with them.
Yeah, it's like a concession or something system, you know, where you have like a shopping mall or something like that, where you could have little concessions and people have space to do their own thing, maybe.
Yeah. The one thing we maybe the mistake we made, we conceived it like a festival, but we didn't think about selling tickets. Maybe next time. But everything is free for everyone, which has created a huge burden for us to carry. But it's going really well. It's going really well. We're really pleased with where we've got so far, and we hope we can sustain it for another 9 weeks or something like that.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
No, it's brilliant. It's been brilliant to work with you again. Our paths have crossed many times, and I'm sure they will again in the future. I'll leave you to finish off your breakfast. I'm going to go and have my lunch now. And then just tell us, what time does the first session kick off?
In half an hour.
In half an hour.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to start with Maita and cooking sections. And then it just sort of goes back to back. So the first session, there'll be 4 back-to-back presentations. And then the next session starts an hour later.
Okay.
So
good luck with it.
Okay, thank you.
And,
thank you for watching us.
See you soon.
Cheers, Marcus. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.